Victoria Woodhull broke many barriers for women when, as a double divorce with a criminal record, she became the first female to run for president, 48 years before women had the right to vote.
At this time, women were beginning to take a stand for their equality. They were expressing their feelings about their rights and importance when compared to men. There were many meetings and protests about women's rights, like the Seneca Falls Convention. Women would even vote and disobey set laws. Victoria Woodhull was one of these women.
Victoria Woodhull was a part of a group of women that were beginning to be seen, heard, and demanding their rights they believed the Constitution gave them. The Seneca Falls Convention was the first large gathering of these like-minded women. They met in New York in July of 1848. This meeting launched the women's suffrage movement. More than 7 decades later, women would gain the right to vote.
Victoria Cleveland Woodhull was born September 23, 1838, in Licking County, Ohio. She was the seventh of 10 children and was the daughter of Reuben and Roxana Claflin. Her mother was a fortune teller and claimed to be clairvoyant. Her father claimed to be a doctor and portrayed himself as Dr. R.B. Claflin, American King of Cancers. Victoria and her family traveled around the country selling medicine and telling fortunes throughout her early years.
When Victoria grew up, she became an editor and a journalist who used her profession to be an activist for women's rights.
In her report, she wrote a lot about free love and how women deserve equal rights. Her idea of free love was that men and women had the right to marry whom they choose, divorce, and decide child custody without government intervention or regulation. Victoria Woodhull for president!
Women deserve equal rights! Equal rights for women!
Women don't need those rights. That crazy woman needs to stay in her place, and so do the rest of you. Go home and take care of your husbands.
Excuse me?
You go home. All women deserve equal rights.
Yeah.
You women can't tell me what to do. Men are above women and always will be. That's the way God wants it.
Ugh. A lot of women stayed in the shadows and didn't speak up. Their husbands were in control and many were afraid to challenge that. Men had legal authority over their wives and could divorce them and take their children away from them. Husbands could even have their misbehaving wives committed to a mental institution.
Victoria Woodhull's first husband, Canning Woodhull, was a doctor like her father claimed to be. But he turned out to be a drunkard and an adulterer. Victoria had to go to work to pay off his drinking debt. And rumors spread that she was a cigar girl, a stage girl, and a topless waitress.
So Victoria took her 2 children and left, and she and Canning divorced. This alone was scandalous, as women were expected to stay with their husbands regardless of his bad behaviors.
Her second marriage was to Colonel James Harvey Blood. They both divorced their spouses and married in 1866, though the legality of their marriage was questioned because the marriage application was incomplete and never filled out by the minister. James believed that women had rights just like men did. He thought that Victoria should follow her passion and run for president. She wanted to show men and women she could make a difference.
As both of them were strong believers in free love, they felt obligated to each other, only as long as they wished to be. They were together for several years and eventually divorced in 1876, though the reason for their divorce was never revealed to the public.
In 1883, Victoria married John Biddulph Martin. They were happily together until Martin's death in 1901.
Victoria's multiple relationships and divorces heavily stigmatized her in the eyes of the public, though this did not stop her from following her passion.
In 1872, Victoria was nominated by the National Equal Rights Party. When Victoria ran for president, she was often disrespected due to her checkered past. However, most people held her in low regard just because she was a woman.
Even her vice presidential candidate, Frederick Douglass, never even acknowledged the fact that he was her running mate. As a black man, Douglass had his own problems with credibility, and he was fearful of being associated with Woodhull, even though he agreed with her cause.
There were many meetings and protests about women's rights. In the court case, the Minor v. Happenstance, the Supreme Court ruled that the 14th Amendment to the Constitution did not give women the right to vote.
Susan B. Anthony was a huge part of this movement. One of her key moments in history was when she was arrested for trying to vote. Ironically, this happened in 1872, the same year that Victoria Woodhull ran for president.
In 1890, Wyoming was the first state to allow women the right to vote. Wyoming was then followed by Utah, Colorado, Idaho, and so on and so forth. This movement continued, leading to the ratification of the 19th Amendment.
Victoria not only ran for president, but she ran during a time when she didn't have the right to vote herself. Sadly, her first attempt, she ended up in jail on election night for sending obscene mail. She wrote about the sexual scandals of Minister Henry Ward Beecher and stockbroker Luther Chalice.
She published details about how the popular minister had committed adultery and that Chalice had gotten 2 teenage girls drunk. She ran 2 more times after, but those attempts failed as well. Because of Victoria Woodhull, women started coming out of their comfort zones. She had done something no other woman had attempted to do before, and it would be 12 years before another woman would try to run again.
Victoria Woodhull ran for president as a way to show that a woman could do it. She influenced many women throughout history, but one named Belva Lockwood in particular. Belva Ann Lockwood, the second woman to run for president, ran in 1884 and 1888. She was also nominated by the National Equal Rights Party and was heavily influenced by Victoria Woodhull, the first woman to run for president.
Victoria Woodhull also influenced Jeannette Rankin. Jeannette Rankin was also a women's rights activist, and she was the first woman to be elected to the National House of Representatives in 1916 and again in 1940.
August 18th, 1920.
The rights of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation.
In 2016, Hillary Clinton became the first viable female candidate to run for president. She ran against Donald Trump and won in the popular vote against him. But Trump, however, won in the Electoral College, therefore making him president over her.
Victoria also went on to several other firsts. Her and her sister Tennessee Claflin were the first female stockbrokers on Wall Street. Victoria was also the first woman to address a congressional committee. But most importantly, Victoria Woodhull was the first woman to run for president of the United States.
Although Victoria Woodhull never became president of the United States, she is one of the most influential women in history. She set an example for other women to follow and proved to be an outstanding female figure in American history.